Mr. Reyes, please take this notebook. Your mother wrote it for you." Clara Voss's voice was hoarse after being turned away 3 times outside the Marisol restaurant that night. She stood there in her faded janitor's uniform, gray eyes shadowed from too many night shifts, 2 calloused hands clutching a worn brown leather journal. Bruno, the broad-shouldered bodyguard, blocked her path. "You and the whole city have a story." Clara gripped the notebook tighter. "This isn't a story. This is her handwriting." Arlo Reyes sat in the shadowed corner over a late supper, the faint scar along his left jaw shifting as he looked up. The 34-year-old man wore a dark tailored suit, a heavy silver ring tapping slowly against the table. "Get her out. She told me that if you wouldn't listen, I had to say this name. Mateo." The fork in Arlo's hand went still. The whole room seemed to hold its breath. No one had called him that name in 26 years, and no one still living was supposed to know it. He looked the girl over, then tipped his chin toward the chair across from him. "Sit," Clara sat, her heart pounding. "My mother died when I was 8, Arlo said, his voice cold as steel. "You're 26 years too late." Clara set the diary on the table and slid it gently toward him. "She passed 3 weeks ago, sir. I sat beside her every night she was afraid, and on her last night she spoke only of you." Arlo didn't move, but something behind those hard eyes had just cracked. "People come here every week with lies." "Then don't believe me," Clara answered, her voice trembling but steady. "Believe the words she left behind. You don't have to like me. You don't have to forgive her. But if you burn this notebook without ever opening it, that'll be your choice, not hers." Arlo stared at the brown leather journal. At last, his silver-ringed fingers touched the cover. "Dora," he said to the older woman near the door, "cancel everything left tonight." Then he looked at Clara again, and this time his gaze was different. "You're coming upstairs with me." Clara rose, her legs unsteady. She should have felt relieved, but she didn't, because something in this powerful man's face told her the diary hadn't saved anything yet. It had only opened a door, and behind that door was a truth older than her own pain. If this moment touched your heart, tap that like button so we know you're listening. Share this video with someone who needs to believe the truth always finds its way home. And don't forget to subscribe so you can walk with us all the way to the end of this story. The elevator closed with a low sound, and Clara felt as though the whole world behind that metal door had just been left behind. No one spoke as it rose. Arlo stood across from her, his eyes fixed on his own blurred reflection in the polished steel, the brown leather journal tucked beneath his arm. When the doors opened on the highest floor, Clara stepped into a wide, dark room washed in soft yellow light, with an entire wall of glass overlooking East Boston Harbor at night, where enormous cranes stood motionless like the spine of a sleeping beast, and the black water glittered with the lights of ships. Dora entered last, closed the door behind them, and spoke for the first time in a low but clear voice. "Sir, we should have someone from legal here before you open anything. We know nothing about this girl. From what I can see, this could be a setup to get money out of you, or worse." Clara turned toward her, pain passing briefly across her face before she could hide it. "I didn't come here for money, Mom. I didn't even know who he was until tonight." Arlo set the journal down on the dark wooden table, sat in the leather chair behind it, and gestured for Clara to sit in the single chair across from him. "What do you do for a living?" "I clean. At Bayside Care Nursing Home, day shift. At night I do extra work at a funeral home." He looked at her as though weighing every word on an invisible scale. "And my mother, the woman you say died 3 weeks ago. How does a housekeeper become her messenger?" Clara drew a breath, trying to keep her voice steady. "She was in room 12, at the end of the hall, where they put people who have no one left to visit them. I was the one who cleaned that room. At first, I only poured water for her. Then I fixed her old radio and read a few pages to her. During her last 8 months, I was the only person who stayed when she was frightened in the night." Dora folded her arms, very moving. "But do you know how many people have sat in this room and told moving stories?" "I don't know," Clara answered, lifting her eyes to meet the woman's directly. "But I do know one thing. People invent stories when they want to take something. I came here to return something." Arlo tilted his head slightly. That answer had touched something in him, though he did not let it show. "The name," he said, his voice lowering. "You said the name downstairs. How do you know it?" Clara placed her hand on the cover of the journal, as if touching it gave her courage. "She wrote it in here, in the final pages, when her hand was shaking so badly she could barely hold the pen. She wrote the real name of her son, Mateo. and she told me that if I found the man named Arlo Reyes at Marisol restaurant, and he refused to listen, I had to say that name. She said it was the only name he would not be able to pretend he had never heard. For a moment, the room held only the ticking of a clock somewhere, and the distant sound of a ship horn drifting in from the harbor. Arlo looked at the journal, then at her, and Clara saw the muscle tighten in his jaw beside the faint scar. "Do you know," he said slowly, "that you are sitting in a place where people can be taken outside within seconds?" "I'm beginning to understand that," Clara said quietly, "but I made a promise to a dying woman, and I don't break promises to people who no longer have the chance to demand them back." Dora glanced at Arlo, waiting for a nod that would summon someone to take the girl away. But that nod never came. Arlo drew from his coat pocket the employee badge Bruno had taken from Clara in the lobby, turning it over in his hand, comparing the exhausted face in the photograph with the face sitting before him. "Clara Voss," he read aloud, 27 years old, Bayside Care. He set the badge down, spout. "You don't need me to believe you, do you? You said that downstairs." "That's right," Clara nodded. "You don't need to believe me. Believe her words. I'm only the person who brought them here. I didn't write a single line in that journal, and I don't understand everything she wrote. But I know a mother does not spend her final breath lying about the child she lost." Arlo looked out through the glass, where the harbor lights blurred in the night mist. For 26 years he had buried the name Mateo so deep he had almost forgotten he had ever been that person, and now it lay there on a tabletop, written in the hand of a woman he had been taught to hate. "Leave the notebook," he said at last. "Go home and rest. My people will take you." Clara stood, but she did not pick up the journal. "I'll leave it. But there is one thing you should know before you read it, sir." Arlo looked up. She was not angry with you. She was only afraid you would never know the truth. And now it is in your hands. She turned away and followed Dora to the door, leaving behind the most powerful man in the eastern part of the city, sitting alone in the dark room, his eyes fixed on the journal as though it were a bomb that could blow his entire life apart. The black car took Clara back to her second-floor apartment in an old boarding house in the South End. But she could not sleep. She sat by the window looking at the pale yellow streetlights, and in her mind, the image of the man in the dark room kept returning again and again, along with Rosa's in the first days Clara had known her. The first time Clara stepped into room 12 at Bayside was on an autumn morning when she was assigned to clean the last corridor, the place people quietly called the Forgotten Wing. That was where they put patients who had no one left to visit them, no greeting cards, no flowers, not a single name written in the visitor log for months at a time. Rosa lay there, a thin woman with silver hair tied neatly back and brown eyes that still held a strange light, the light of someone who had endured too much but had never let it turn her bitter. Clara had only meant to mop the floor and leave, as she did in every other room, but Rosa had looked at her and said, in a hoarse but warm voice, that she had the hands of someone who knew how to care for people. From that day on, Clara began staying a little longer each day, pouring her a glass of water, fixing the old radio that was always full of static, and reading a few pages to her when her eyes had grown too tired. 8 months passed that way, and in those 8 months, Clara slowly came to understand something that made her heart tighten, that this woman was completely alone in the world. Not once did anyone call to ask about her. Not once did a stranger appear in the hallway looking for her. When the nursing home filled out her forms, the emergency contact space in Rosa's file was left blank because she had no one. One afternoon, while Clara was helping her sign several medical papers again, Rosa took her hand and whispered, "Could you put your name here, child, so that if something happens, at least there will be one person in this world for them to tell?" And Clara had done it. She had not thought much when she wrote her name in that space. She had only felt she could not bear to let a human being leave this world without anyone knowing. Rosa rarely spoke of the past. She spoke about the weather, about the old songs coming from the radio, about the cakes she had once made when she was young. But on certain nights, when pain came and the medicine had not yet taken hold, she became someone else entirely, her eyes fixed on empty air as though seeing through many years, and she whispered sentences Clara did not fully understand, in both English and Spanish. On those nights, she often mentioned a son. She did not say who he was, did not say what had happened, only that he was still alive, that he had become an important man, that he owned a restaurant called Marisol on the eastern side of the city. Once Clara asked why she did not call him, and Rosa had only slowly shaken her head and said, "There are doors people close not because love is gone, but because they are afraid their love will harm the person they love." Clara had not understood that sentence then. She had only thought it was the sorrow of an old mother abandoned by her child, a story she had seen too many times in the last corridor. She had not known that the man named Arlo Reyes was not merely a restaurant owner, and that the name Marisol hid a world that people like her should never step into. On the final night, when Rosa knew she did not have much time left, she gave Clara the brown leather journal she always kept hidden beneath her pillow. Her hands were trembling so badly that Clara had to support both of them. She said, "You are the only person I can trust. Take this to him. Put it directly into his hands. Do not let anyone else hold it. And if he refuses to listen to you, if he sends you away, say this name. Mateo." She repeated that name again and again, as though afraid Clara might forget it. Mateo. That was the name I gave him when he was born, before they took even that name from me. Clara had promised. She had not known what she was promising, had not known how far that promise would pull her in. She only knew that Rosa was looking at her with the eyes of someone finally daring to place hope in another human being, and she could not refuse. 3 days later, Rosa died in her sleep, quietly, the way she had lived through the final years of her life. The home buried her quickly under the category of no relatives, in a small grave with a marker bearing the name Rosa Delgado, the name Clara would only later learn had not been her real one. As for the journal, it had stayed in the drawer of Clara's desk for 2 weeks, because she had not had enough courage and had not known where to begin, until the night she stood before the door of Marisol restaurant and was turned away 3 times. Now, sitting by the window of her dark apartment, Clara looked down at her calloused hands and wondered whether she had done the right thing, whether handing that journal to that man was the end of her part, or only the beginning of something far larger than herself. Next morning, in the glass-walled room on the top floor of Marisol, Arlo stood looking out over the harbor with the unopened journal still lying untouched on the table, while Dora placed a thin file in front of him. "I had someone look into the girl, as you asked," she said, her voice still carrying its professional caution. "And honestly, if this is a scheme, then it's the most elaborate scheme I've ever seen, because nothing in her life looks like a scheme at all. Only suffering." Arlo picked up the file and turned through the pages. Clara Voss, 27 years old, orphaned of both parents at 24 after a car accident that left her the only person remaining to care for her younger brother. Samuel Voss, 16 years old, paralyzed in both legs from that same accident, confined to a wheelchair, attending high school through online classes, because the family could not afford transportation. Clara worked the day shift at Bayside and the night shift at a funeral home, saving every dollar to pay off years of hospital debt and to put money aside for a surgery the Dr. Sal said might help her brother regain some feeling in his legs. They had been forced to move 3 times because they could not keep up with rent. Arlo stopped reading there. He had met every kind of person in his life, people who pretended to be poor, people who played the victim, people who used tears as a form of currency. But there was something in these dry lines that he could not brush aside, the consistency of a life with no room for acting, a life in which every day was only a struggle to keep someone else alive. "Call her in," he said. That afternoon, Clara stepped into that glass room again, this time under daylight that made everything look less frightening, but also revealed more clearly how out of place she was there. She was still wearing her thin, worn coat, and at her collar, a slender silver chain glimmered, holding a small teardrop pendant dulled by the years. Arlo noticed it, though he did not know why. "Sit down," he said. Clara sat, both hands resting in her lap. "Have you read it yet?" "No," he looked at her. "I read about you first." Clara went faintly rigid. "You investigated me. I investigate everyone who walks into this room. That is how I am still alive today." He closed the file. "Your brother Samuel. The surgery you're saving money for. How much does it cost?" Clara tightened her hands. "That is none of your business." "I'm not asking so I can give you charity," Arlo said, his voice calm to the point of coldness. "I'm asking because I need to understand a person. Someone with nothing left to lose is dangerous. Someone with only one thing left to lose is predictable. You belong to the second kind." Clara lifted her eyes and looked straight at him, and this time a question that had been waiting inside her since the night before broke free. "Who are you, Mr. Reyes?" A restaurant owner doesn't have people investigate a housekeeper's background. A restaurant owner doesn't have men like Bruno guarding his door at midnight. A restaurant owner doesn't make an entire room hold its breath when he gives an order. For a moment, the air in the room thickened. Dora glanced toward Arlo, and Arlo did not answer. He only looked at Clara, silently, his dark eyes revealing nothing, and that very silence answered her more clearly than any words could have. It was the silence of a man who did not need to explain himself, because real power never introduces itself by name. Clara felt a chill move down her spine as she understood, too late, that the kind woman in room 12 had sent her into a place far darker than she had imagined, that the name Marisol was not merely a restaurant, and that the man sitting before her did not live in the same world as people who worked 2 shifts to pay their debts. "I understand," she said quietly, her voice trembling but carrying no intention of running. "I shouldn't ask." "You have the right to ask," Arlo replied. "You just won't like the answer." He stood, walked to the glass, and looked down at the harbor. "My mother, if she truly is my mother, sent you into a place where decent people rarely survive whole. I do not understand what she was thinking." Clara looked at his back. "Maybe she thought you were still the person she once knew. Someone who could hear the truth." Arlo did not turn around, but the fingers wearing the silver ring tightened slightly. Clara lifted her hand and unconsciously touched the silver necklace at her throat, a habit she had whenever she was afraid, because it was the only thing her mother had left her, the thing she had kept through every move, every hungry night, every moment when it felt as though there was nothing left to hold on to. "That necklace," Arlo suddenly said, still looking through the glass. "It belonged to your mother." Clara startled. "How did you know?" "Because you touch it the way a person touches someone who is gone." He turned back to look at her, and for the first time, in those iron, hard eyes, something almost like understanding passed through. "I once had something like that too. They took it from me when I was a child." Clara did not know that those words were the first door opening onto the truth hidden inside the journal, and that the thing once taken from him would, before long, return to that man's hands. That night, after Clara had gone home, Arlo remained alone in the glass room, and for the first time since she had placed it on the table, he opened the brown leather journal. The woman's handwriting slanted across the pages, trembling in some places, darker in others where the pen had stopped, as though she were trying to hold something back. He did not read in order. He only turned the pages, his eyes moving over the lines until they stopped on a page near the beginning, where 3 words made his whole body go still. "Eres mi cielo," "You are my sky." And with those 3 words, something inside him, something he had buried so deep, he had thought it had rotted away with the years, suddenly stirred awake. He remembered. He did not want to remember, but he remembered. A small wooden music box, its top carved with a bird spreading its wings, the paint chipped at the corners from the touch of a child's hands too many times. The boy named Matteo had hidden it beneath his pillow, and every night, after the house had gone dark, he had secretly opened the lid to hear that tinkling melody rise in the darkness, because it was the tune his mother used to hum when she sang him to sleep. And her song always began with those 3 words, "Eres mi cielo." The boy had believed that as long as he could still hear that melody, his mother was still somewhere, still coming back. But then one day, the music box disappeared. Arlo closed his eyes, and the memory returned so clearly it hurt. It was after he had been brought to live in the great house of Hector Salazar, the man around whom his entire world would later revolve, the man he had been taught to call father. Salazar had found the music box in the boy's room, lifted it, listened to the melody with an expression young Matteo could not understand then, a cold look of contempt. "A woman's trinket," he had said, then placed it inside a cabinet and locked it away. The boy never saw the music box again. Salazar never laid a hand on him. He fed him well, dressed him well, sent him to good schools, and taught him everything about how a man must stand firm in this world. But every time the boy cried because he missed his mother, Salazar would sit before him and say the same thing in a frighteningly calm voice. That love was the weakest thing in the world, that his mother had left because she had not been strong enough to stay, and that if he wanted to survive, he had to learn not to need anyone. Year after year, the man repeated that until the boy believed it as if it were truth itself. By the time he was 10, he stopped waiting for his mother. By the time he was 15, he stopped asking about her. And by the time he became Arlo Reyes, The man, the whole eastern side of the city knew to treat with caution. He had turned his mother into a lesson. The woman who had taught him that loving someone meant placing a knife in their hand and letting them stab you in the back. He set the journal down, his hand faintly trembling, and that was when he realized he had not heard Clara knock. She stood in the doorway with a paper bag of food Dora had asked her to bring up, her eyes resting on his face, and she understood at once that he had just touched something very deep. "I'm sorry," she said quietly. "I didn't mean to disturb you. Come in," Arlo said, his voice rougher than usual. Clara set the bag of food down, but she did not leave. She looked at the open journal. "Did you read something?" Arlo was silent for a long while, then he spoke almost to himself. "There was a music box when I was little. They told me my mother left because she was weak, that she chose to walk away from me." Clara stepped a little closer. "And what did you read in there now?" "3 words," he answered. "In her es mi chilo." He lifted his eyes to her. A person who chooses to leave does not write words like that for 26 years. Clara stood still, then spoke in the plain, honest voice Rosa must have heard through those long nights in room 12. "Mr. Reyes, maybe disappearing was not her choice. Some people do not leave. They are taken. And sometimes the person who teaches a child to hate his mother is the very person who took that mother away from him." The sentence fell into the room and stayed there, heavy and still. Arlo looked at her, and for the first time in many years, doubt about the story of his own life slipped into him. A small crack in the wall Salazar had built throughout his childhood. He had not yet answered when Clara's phone suddenly vibrated in her coat pocket, and the words Bayside Care appeared on the screen, making her heart tighten. Because she knew that at this hour, a call from that place rarely brought good news. Clara pressed the phone to her ear, and the voice of the night attendant at Bayside came through, tired but clear. "Is this Miss Voss? I'm sorry to call so late, but the file lists you as the contact for Mrs. Rosa Delgado. We need to let you know that room 12 will be cleared tomorrow morning for a new patient. The personal belongings she left behind, since no family has come to claim them, will be sent away for disposal at 8 o'clock in the morning according to policy. If you want to keep anything, you'll need to come before then." Clara tightened her grip on the phone. "What belongings? I thought everything was inventoried when she passed. There is still one small box in storage, miss. Just odds and ends, sweaters, books, a few old things. But after 8 o'clock, we can't keep it any longer." She thanked the woman and ended the call, and when she looked up, she saw Arlo watching her. "What is it?" he asked. "Bayside," Clara said, her voice trembling slightly. "They're clearing out her room tomorrow morning. There's still a box of personal belongings no one has claimed. After 8 o'clock in the morning, they'll throw it away." She stopped, then went on, almost to herself. "I don't know what's in it. I never saw her keep anything besides this journal. But if those are the last things she left in this world, I don't want them tossed away like trash." Arlo did not speak at once. He looked at the journal still lying open on the table, the 3 Spanish words seeming to burn on the page, then looked out over the nighttime harbor, where fog had thickened across the water. Inside him, 2 voices were struggling against each other. One was cold, the voice of the man who had survived a whole world full of traps, telling him this could still be part of some performance, that a box of belongings in a nursing home meant nothing to a man like him, that he owed the dead woman nothing at all. But there was another voice, fainter, coming from somewhere deep that he had locked away long ago, the voice of the boy who once hid a music box under his pillow, and that voice whispered that if there was one piece of truth in that box, even only one piece, he would never forgive himself if he let it burn away with everything else. "Dora," he called. The older woman stepped in, and when she heard Arlo say he intended to go to Bayside that very night, her face darkened. "Sir, I beg you to think again. It is past midnight. You mean to personally go to a nursing home and search through a box of old belongings from a woman you did not even believe was real 3 days ago? If this is a trap, then this is exactly how someone would lure you out of safety, to a location they chose, at an hour they chose." "She works there," Arlo answered. "Her file matches. The call came from the facility itself, and if an old woman in room 12 is part of some game," Dora said, refusing to back down, "then I fear I will have to admire whoever designed it. She is dead, Dora." Arlo's words cut through her argument, not loudly, but enough to silence her. People do not die to set a trap. And if someone is cruel enough to do that, then I want to look that person in the eye. Clara looked from one to the other, then spoke softly but clearly. You don't have to go, sir. I can pick it up myself. I'm only a cleaner there. No one will ask me anything." Arlo turned to look at her, and in that instant he realized something that surprised even him, that he did not want to let her go alone. Not because of the box, but because there was something in her, that fierce honesty, that made him want, for the first time in many years, to see with his own eyes the place where his mother had spent her final days. "No," he said. "I'll go. You'll come with me to show the way." Dora let out a long breath, knowing that once Arlo had decided nothing could move him, but she still added one final sentence, in the voice of someone who had served him long enough to speak plainly. "In 9 years of working for you, I have never seen you set foot in a place like that yourself. Be careful, sir. There are doors that, once opened, cannot be closed again." Arlo took the journal, slipped it into the inside pocket of his coat, close to his chest, and for the first time in his life, he carried something that belonged to his mother. "I know," he answered quietly. "That is exactly why I have to go." And so, in that thick, foggy night, the black car rolled away from the harbor, carrying a powerful man and a poor girl toward the nursing home, where an empty room was waiting to be cleared, along with the final secrets of the woman who was gone. The car rolled through the empty streets of the working-class district at night, where pale yellow streetlights fell over old porches, a homeless man curled beneath a blanket in the corner of a wall, and a woman in a cleaning uniform waited for the last bus of the day, rubbing her hands together for warmth. Arlo looked through the window, and for the first time he saw the world Clara lived in every day, a world only a few miles from his own building yet distant as another planet. Inside the car, no one spoke for a long while, until Arlo finally said, his eyes still on the street outside, "If my mother really lived in a place like that through the final years of her life, then she had plenty of chances to find me. I am not hard to find. My name is on an entire building." Clara turned toward him. "You're doing it again." "Doing what?" "Turning every sad thing into an accusation before it has time to hurt you," she said. "She did not look for you, so it was her fault. She stayed silent, so she deserved to be forgotten. You arrange everything so neatly that you never have to ask yourself whether maybe she could not come." Arlo turned to look at her, and in the streetlights passing over his face, Clara saw the briefest flicker of something like being struck in a tender place. "You speak very boldly to a man you just learned is dangerous." "I sit beside dying people every night, Mr. Reyes," she replied. "When people are close to death, they stop lying, and those of us sitting beside them learn to stop walking in circles around the truth. I don't have much patience left for pretty words." He did not answer, but he did not dismiss her words either, and the rest of the drive passed in a silence very different from the one, at the beginning, a silence with less armor in it. When the car stopped in front of Bayside, the building appeared low and old, nothing like the structures that bore the Reyes name, with automatic doors scratched by years of wheelchairs and stretchers passing through. Clara led him in through a corridor she knew by heart, avoiding the main desk, and Arlo followed her, each of his steps in this place heavier than they ever were in his own office, because this was a world he had never had to enter through the front door. Room 12 was at the end of the hall. Clara stopped before it, and when she pushed it open, they both went still. The room had already been cleared. The bed where Rosa had once lain had been made with fresh sheets, the blanket folded neatly, the pillow smooth and white, as though no one had ever rested a head there. There was no book on the table, no old radio, no trace left of the woman who had lived here through the last 8 months of her life. Clara stood at the threshold, feeling something catch in her throat, because even though she worked in care homes and had grown used to rooms being cleared quickly, seeing this place so empty still made her chest ache. Arlo stepped inside and stood in the middle of the bare room, looking around as if searching for something that was no longer there. "Where did she lie?" he asked quietly. Clara pointed toward the window. "There." She liked looking outside. She said the sky was the only thing no one could lock away. Just then, a voice sounded from the hallway. "Clara, is that you?" A middle-aged woman in a nurse's uniform stepped toward them, her kind face worn with fatigue, her glasses dangling from a cord around her neck. "Miss Inez," Clara said. "I came to collect Rosa's things." The nurse's eyes moved to Arlo, pausing for a moment on his expensive suit and cold face. Then she turned back to Clara with a quiet look of understanding. "This is her son, isn't it?" she said, not as a question. Arlo looked at her. "How did you know?" Inez stepped into the room and rested her hand on the bed rail where Rosa had once lain. "Because she mentioned you." Not often, not in a way that troubled anyone, only one name. On the nights when the pain came and the medicine had not yet taken hold, when she was half awake and half dreaming, she would call out, "Mateo, always Mateo." Arlo stood motionless, and Clara saw the muscle near the scar in his jaw shift slightly. "I thought it was the name of someone dead whom she missed," Inez went on, her voice gentle. "Only later did I understand. It was someone still alive, someone she never dared call for in daylight, only in her dreams, when fear had fallen asleep and only love remained." She looked at Arlo with the eyes of someone who had witnessed too many farewells. "She waited for you until the very end, you know. Even when she no longer believed you would come." The sentence hung in the empty room, and Arlo, the man who had never bowed his head before anyone, quietly turned his face away so no one would see what was rising in his eyes. Inez led them down to the basement, where there was a small storage room crowded with cardboard boxes stacked on metal shelves, each box marked with a slip of paper bearing the name of someone who had died. Names that soon might have no one left to come looking for them. She searched for a while, then pulled out a small box, its lid marked in hurried handwriting, "Rosa Delgado, room 12. "Here it is," she said, setting it on the old table in the middle of the room. "I'll leave you two alone, take your time." Then she quietly withdrew, closing the door behind her. Clara looked at Arlo, and when he did not move, she opened the lid herself. On top lay a worn gray sweater, the one Rosa used to wrap around herself on cold days, and when Clara lifted it out, a faint scent drifted up, the smell of cheap soap and old age, making her eyes sting because it was so painfully familiar. Beneath the sweater was a small Bible with a loose cover, a pair of reading glasses, and a wooden rosary polished smooth from being touched again and again. Clara placed each item gently on the table, as though it might break, as though the woman who was gone could still feel the hands touching the last things of her life. Then, at the bottom of the box, beneath a layer of yellowed newspaper, her fingers touched something hard. She drew it out, and when the light fell over it, she heard Arlo behind her take in the faintest breath, so quiet it was almost not a sound at all. It was a small wooden music box. The top was carved with a bird spreading its wings, the paint chipped at the corners. For a moment, Arlo did not breathe. He stepped closer, slowly, like a man approaching something that might vanish if he touched it too quickly, and he took the box from Clara's hands. His fingers, the ones wearing silver rings, the hands that had once made the entire eastern side of the city tremble, now shook as they traced each carved line on the wooden lid. "It can't be," he said, his voice so low Clara had to lean in to hear it. They locked it away. I never saw it again." He lifted his eyes to Clara, and for the first time since she had met him, the powerful man's face had no armor left on it. "This is my music box. From when I was a child. They took it from me and said I would never again be allowed to keep women's things." Clara felt her throat tighten. Then she must have gotten it back, somehow, and she kept it all those years. Arlo opened the lid. The mechanism inside was old, rusted by time, but when he wound it, a frail tinkling melody rose in the cold storage room, broken, trembling, but still the same melody. The melody of the 3 words he had read in the journal, "Iris mi cielo." And when the first note sounded, something inside that man, something frozen for 26 years beneath the ice Salazar had so carefully built, began to crack. He did not cry aloud. A man like him did not know how to cry aloud. But he stood there, in the room filled with the keepsakes of the forgotten, his shoulders faintly trembling, his eyes fixed on the music box singing in the palm of his hand, and Clara understood that she was witnessing something perhaps no one had ever been allowed to see. The boy named Mateo, buried for so many years beneath Arlo Reyes. Rising back to the surface for a single moment, she quietly stepped back, giving him that space, and she looked down into the bottom of the box where one final thing remained, a small envelope faded with age. She picked it up, and inside was not a letter, but a small brass key attached to a piece of stiff paper on which Rosa had written in her familiar trembling hand. Clara read the line, then lifted her face, and her voice sounded softly in the silence. "Mr. Reyes, there's something else." Arlo closed the music box and turned toward her, and Clara handed him the key and the slip of paper. He took them and read his mother's words. "Locker number 47, Old Station." He looked at it for a long while, and when he raised his eyes, his face had changed. The pain was still there, but now there was something else beneath it, something sharper, clearer. "She did not only leave a journal," he said slowly. "She left a path. She wanted me to find something." Clara looked at the key in his hand, and a vague unease rose inside her. because she was beginning to understand that whatever Rosa had hidden might be larger and more dangerous than anything either of them had imagined. By the time the car brought them back to Marisol, it was nearly 3 o'clock in the morning. Bruno was waiting in the lobby, and the moment Clara stepped through the door, with the cardboard box in her arms, the broad-shouldered bodyguard followed her with his eyes, as though he were watching a threat. He waited until Arlo had gone up in the elevator ahead of her with Dora to discuss business. Then he blocked Clara at the foot of the stairs, lowering his voice, though every word landed heavy as stone. "You think I don't see it," he said. "3 days ago, you fell out of nowhere with a notebook and a name no one should still know. Now he is driving himself through the night to places he has never set foot in before. Do you know what a name like that is worth to people who want him dead?" Clara tightened her arms around the box. "I don't understand what you're talking about." "You understand perfectly," Bruno said through clenched teeth. "The Caruso family has wanted to gut this organization for years, and the easiest way to bring down a man like Mr. Reyes is not with bullets, but by finding the soft place in him. A dead mother, an old name. Do you know what a good spy looks like? Exactly like you right now, a poor, pitiful girl with a story that breaks the heart." He stepped closer, and even though he did not touch her, his massive shadow fell over Clara like a wall. "I won't let you drag him into the abyss. If you're smart, you'll put that box down, walk out that door, and never come back." Clara felt her heart pounding, felt her legs wanting to give way, but she did not step back. She lifted her head and looked straight at him, and when she spoke, her voice trembled but did not yield. "You're right about one thing. I am a poor girl. I scrub other people's floors for a living. I sit beside dead bodies so I can pay for my brother's medicine. If I were a paid spy, then God be my witness. I've been paid so miserably that it's almost tragic, because I still don't have enough money for his surgery. You want to think I'm a traitor? Then go ahead. But I didn't come here because of any Caruso family. I came because a dying woman took my hand and asked me for one last thing. And I'm the kind of person who does not abandon a promise, even when it leads me into a place like this." Bruno stared at her, and perhaps it was the very calm inside her fear that made him falter. "What is happening here?" Arlo's voice came from the direction of the elevator. He had come back down and was standing there, his eyes moving from Bruno to Clara, reading the whole situation in a single glance. Bruno straightened. "I was telling her how much danger she is putting you in, sir. A stranger, an old name, a path leading you to places with no guards. This is the Caruso family's textbook. You know that better than anyone." Arlo stepped forward slowly, and the whole lobby seemed to fall silent. "You're right," he said, and Clara felt her heart sink. "That is exactly how someone would try to bring me down." He stopped in front of Bruno. "So I checked. I had my people trace every year of her life. There is not a single thread connecting her to the Caruso family or to anyone else. She is exactly who she says she is. A cleaner raising a disabled younger brother. A Caruso spy would have a cleaner background than this. Bruno, not 3 evictions from boarding houses and a stack of hospital bills." Bruno still did not give in. "And if you're wrong, sir, then that is my risk, not yours." Arlo's voice had shifted into the coldness everyone in the organization understood could not be challenged. "She is under my protection. From now on, anyone who touches her touches me. Is that clear?" Bruno looked at him for a moment, then bowed his head. "Clear, sir." He turned away. And once he was gone, Clara still stood there, clutching the box, trembling as she realized what had just happened. This man, the man who 3 days earlier had ordered her thrown out the door, had just stood between her and harm. She looked at him and could find no words. "Don't mind Bruno's words," Arlo said, his voice softening a little. "He suspects everyone. That is his job, and that is the reason I am still alive." "And you?" Clara asked quietly. "Why do you believe me?" Arlo looked at her for a while, then answered with a kind of honesty that seemed to surprise even him. "Because in my whole life, liars have always tried to make me like them. You haven't tried to do that even once." He turned toward the elevator and added, without looking back, "Come up. We need to open that locker. And I want you there when I do it, back in the glass room on the high floor." Arlo placed the wooden music box on the table beside the journal, and for a long while he only looked at both objects. As though they were 2 pieces of a picture he did not yet have the courage to put together. At last he pushed the journal toward Clara. "Read it to me," he said. "I skimmed through it, but I can't read these lines aloud in my own voice. You sat beside her, you read it." Clara hesitated, but she picked up the journal, turned to the middle pages where the handwriting was still steadier, and began to read, her voice moving slowly through the quiet room. The first lines were from a young mother, writing about a little boy whose eyes were exactly like his father's, about mornings when she soothed him with the melody from the wooden box. Then the tone changed, growing darker when she wrote about the day her husband died. Clara read, and line by line, the words began to uncover a truth neither she nor Arlo had ever imagined. After Mateo's father died, a man named Hector Salazar, who had been the family's business partner, appeared. He said the family was burdened with enormous debts left behind by the husband, debts that a widowed woman with no profession, no money, and no one standing behind her could never hope to repay. And then he offered what he called a way out. The child, Mateo, would stay, raised by the Reyes family, properly educated, brought up in wealth and safety. As for her, she had to leave Boston and never try to make contact again. Clara stopped, lifted her eyes to Arlo, then read the next line, her voice trembling softly. Rosa had written that she knelt and begged him to let her keep her son, that she would rather live in the deepest poverty than be separated from him. But Salazar had said only one thing to her, in the calm voice that Arlo himself would later come to know too well, that if she remained stubborn, he had ways to make every court in this city believe she was an unfit mother, an unstable woman, and that then she would lose her child forever without being allowed to see him even one more time. He told her that if she truly loved the boy, she would not force him to grow up under scandal and court battles. And so she signed the paper he gave her, not because she had stopped loving her son, but because she loved him enough to accept erasing herself from his life. Clara turned to the next page, and what she read next made Arlo sit up straighter. Rosa had written that after she left, she changed her name to Rosa Delgado, drifting through many cities, doing every kind of work she could just to survive. Salazar believed she had vanished for good, and years later, when he heard that a woman named Rosa Delgado had died somewhere far away, he believed she was truly dead and no longer watched her. It was that false identity that gave her the freedom to quietly follow her son through newspapers, through brief reports about a young man rising in the underworld, a man people called Arlo. By the time Clara reached this part, her voice tightened. Rosa had written that Arlo was not the name she had given him. The name she had given her son was Mateo, the name that carried her prayer, meaning gift of God. Arlo was the name Salazar had given the boy afterward, the way someone names a thing that belongs to them, to erase every trace of the mother, so the child would grow up with no thread left connecting him back to her. When Clara finished that sentence, the room sank into a heavy silence. Arlo sat motionless, and Clara saw something inside him breaking in a quiet and terrible way, because what he had just heard was not only the story of his mother, but the truth that even the name he had carried his whole life, the identity upon which he had built an entire empire, was a lie written by someone else. "My whole life," he said, his voice hoarse and thick, almost unrecognizable as his own. "I thought I knew who I was. It turns out even the name people call me was something they used to bury her." Clara set the journal down, and she spoke softly, but every word seemed to touch the deepest place in him. She died still believing she was the one who had to apologize, Mr. Reyes. Apologizing for being afraid, apologizing for signing that paper. For 26 years she carried another man's sin as though it were her own. Arlo looked at the journal, then at the music box, and for the first time in his life, the anger inside him was no longer aimed at the woman who had left him, but began turning toward the man who had taught him to hate her. Arlo stood, walked to the glass, and looked down at the nighttime harbor without truly seeing anything at all, because what he was looking at was somewhere much farther away, more than 20 years in the past. He remembered Salazar's great house and the child he had once been, sitting by the second-floor window every Sunday afternoon, pressing his forehead to the cold glass, his eyes fixed on the long road leading to the gate. That boy waited. He told no one what he was waiting for, but he waited, week after week, for a familiar figure to appear at the end of the road and come back to take him home. Once, a servant in the house found him sitting there and asked whom he was waiting for, and he did not answer, because even then he had faintly sensed that they did not want him to wait, that his longing was something shameful. And sure enough, when Salazar learned of it, he sat down in front of him and said, in that voice that never rose yet still made the boy cold all over, that he was making a fool of himself, that his mother had chosen another life, that only the weak sat waiting for someone who had turned her back. Standing here now, in his own glass room, Arlo realized something that made his chest tighten until he could barely breathe. All those years, he had misunderstood everything. The boy at the window had not been foolish the way he would later think of himself. He had been right. His instinct had been right. There truly was someone out there thinking of him. A mother longing day and night to come back. Only that woman had been imprisoned by the fear someone else had planted inside her. The longing Salazar had forced him to feel ashamed of had turned out to be the truest thing in his entire childhood, and the cruelest thing was not that he had been separated from his mother, but that they had taken from him even the right to believe he was still loved. They had not only taken his mother away, they had taught him to hate the very part of his heart that still remembered her. He had been taught that love was weakness, and he had believed it so completely that he had turned it into the compass of his whole life, until he became a man who allowed no one close, who did not allow himself to need anyone. He had once called that strength. Now, standing before the truth, he realized it was only the scar of a deceived child dressed in the name of courage. "I hated her," he said, without turning around, his voice low and slow. "Every birthday I told myself the woman who gave birth to me had not even bothered to send a single line. I didn't know those lines existed. They simply never reached my hands." He stopped, and Clara understood that this was all he would allow himself to say about that loss, one single sentence, because any more and the last layer of armor would finally break. "I built an entire world on the belief that I needed no one, and I built it against someone who had never truly left me." Clara sat quietly, giving those words room in the air, then she spoke, gentle but honest, as she always was. "The saddest thing, Mr. Reyes, is not only what they did to her. It is that until the end of her life, she still thought she was the one at fault. She died still believing she had to apologize for being afraid, for not being strong enough to fight a man who had the whole city in his hands. She carried another person's shame for more than 20 years, and she carried it alone." Arlo turned back to look at her, and in his eyes now was something Clara had never seen before, no longer cold defensiveness, but a naked pain slowly hardening into something else, something more solid and more dangerous. "She had nothing to apologize for," he said, each word seeming to carve itself into the air. "The only person in this story who owes an apology is still alive, and for more than 20 years he has slept peacefully every night, believing no one was left alive to expose what he did." He looked down at the brass key lying on the table, at the slip of paper marked locker number 47, and Clara saw the resolve in his eyes sharpen like a blade. "But my mother did not let everything die with her. She left me a path, and tomorrow morning we will follow that path to the end." The old station stood on the northern edge of the city, a gray stone structure long out of use, though it still kept its old rows of storage lockers for those who continued paying the yearly rental fee. The next morning, Arlo, Clara, and Dora walked through the empty hall where their footsteps echoed, and beneath the gray light filtering through the dusty skylights, they made their way to the metal lockers in the far corner. Locker number 47 was near the bottom, its blue paint peeling away. Arlo slid the brass key into the lock, and after a moment of hesitation turned it. The small door sprang open with a dry creak. There was not much inside, but each item seemed to thicken the air in the station hall. A bundle of letters tied with a fraying cord, all addressed to Mateo, not one of them ever sent. An old cassette tape, its label marked in Rose's trembling hand with only 2 words, "For you." And at the very bottom, a yellowed piece of paper that made Dora's face go pale when she picked it up and examined it. "This is a death certificate," she said, her voice dropping. "It bears the name Rosa Delgado, but it's false. I've seen enough real and forged documents in my life to know. This seal, this format, it doesn't match any official record. Someone forged her death." Arlo took the paper and looked at it for a long while, then set it down and picked up the tape. "There has to be a way to listen to this," he said. Dora took an old cassette player from her bag, one she had brought in case it was needed, slipped the tape inside, and pressed the button. For the first few seconds there was only the hiss of old tape. Then a voice rose, fragile and trembling, the voice of a woman already weak, yet still warm enough to make Clara lift a hand to cover her mouth. It was Rosa's voice. She hummed softly, a few lines of the melody from the wooden box, "Eres mi cielo, eres mi sol." "You are my sky, you are my sun," and Arlo stood frozen, because this was the first time in more than 20 years that he had heard that singing voice again. the voice that had once lulled him to sleep when he was only a child, the voice his memory had almost lost. When the song stopped, her voice continued, no longer singing now but confiding, as though she knew that one day her son would sit and hear these words. She said there were things she had not dared to write on paper, because paper could be found, but she had to leave her son the truth, however late it had come. And then she spoke the thing the whole station hall seemed to hold its breath to hear. She said Mateo's father had not died in an accident, as people had always been told. She said that before his death, her husband had discovered Hector Salazar was embezzling and betraying the very organization the two men had built together, and that he had planned to expose it. She said the so-called accident had happened only a few days after her husband confronted Salazar, and that deep in her heart, she had always known, though she could never prove it, that the man had arranged everything to clear the road for himself. She said, her voice breaking on the tape, that this was the true reason she had not dared fight him when he came to take her son away, because she had understood what he could do to those who stood in his path, and she would rather lose her child than see him laid in the ground like his father. The tape ran to the end, leaving only an empty hiss, but no one moved. Arlo stood there, and Clara saw something inside him collapse, not noisily, but coldly and completely, like a building falling inward upon itself. The man who had raised him, who had given him the name he carried, who had taught him every lesson about strength and power, was the very man who had stolen both his father and his mother from him, then built the person he became on top of those ashes. Dora was the one who broke the silence, and her voice, for the first time since Clara had met her, no longer carried its professional calm. "Sir," she said quietly, "there are things I have kept inside for many years and never dared say. The way Salazar took control of the organization after your father died, the way the people loyal to your father disappeared one by one, or were pushed aside. I wondered about it once, but I chose not to ask because asking meant death. I am sorry, I should have told you long ago." Arlo did not answer her right away. He bent down and picked up the bundle of letters bearing his name. Letters that had never reached him, and when he lifted his face again, it had changed entirely. The pain was still there, but now it had been pressed beneath something cold and sharp as steel. "More than 20 years, he said, his voice quiet but clear in every word. He sat at the head of the dinner table, called me son, and every day he looked into my face without blinking. He tightened his grip around the letters in his hand. It is time I return that look to him." Back in the glass room, Arlo spread everything across the dark wooden table, the brown leather journal, the bundle of unsent letters addressed to Mateo, the cassette tape, the false death certificate, and the wooden music box placed at the center like a silent piece of evidence for it all. He stood before them, both hands braced against the edge of the table, and for the first time, he looked at everything not through the eyes of a grieving son, but through the eyes of a man reconstructing a crime scene. Dora pulled a chair closer, set her notebook on the table, and the two of them began fitting each piece together, as they had done with hundreds of other matters over the past 9 years. Only this time the matter was Arlo's own life. "Start with your father's death," Dora said, her voice having regained its professional sharpness. "The tape says the accident happened a few days after your father confronted Salazar about the embezzlement. If that is true, there must be traces. Police records from that time, witnesses, anyone still alive who was close to the organization in those years." Arlo nodded. "Frank Owen." The name came out of his mouth like a stone. "The old lawyer. He was with Salazar even before I was brought back. Every paper in my life passed through his hands. Adoption papers, name change papers, everything. If anyone could forge a death certificate clean enough to last this long, it would be him." Dora wrote down the name, then pointed to the false death certificate. "This is their weakest point. A staged death may leave no evidence after 20 years. But a forged document does leave something behind. It is physical, something we can hold, with a seal and dates. If we can prove this document is false and trace who created it, then Salazar's whole castle of lies starts to crack from there." Clara sat in the corner of the room, silently watching, and she noticed something changing in Arlo. Last night he had been a man torn apart by pain. This morning he had become something else, colder, more focused, a man who had stopped grieving the past and begun calculating what came next. "And the letters," she said, and both of them turned to look at her. "I don't understand much about these things, but the letters she wrote to you and couldn't send, they are evidence too, aren't they?" They prove she never abandoned you. They prove she lived, and she tried. Arlo looked at her, then at the bundle of letters, and nodded slowly. Yes, they prove she was alive long after the date on that paper says she died. Put these two things side by side, and they create a contradiction no words from Salazar can explain. He straightened and began pacing before the glass, the stride of a man arranging pieces on a board inside his mind. I cannot go to him with anger. Anger is what he understands best. He taught me how to use it to control other people. If I go to him in anger, he will read me like a page. I have to go with the truth, complete, undeniable, and I have to go when every loose thread is already in my hand. Dora looked up, worry returning to her face. Sir, you understand what this means. Salazar is not some harmless retired old man. He still has loyalists inside the organization, men who have followed him for decades. If you openly move against him, you are not only exposing an old crime, you are declaring war on the man who made you. And not everyone in this organization will stand with the truth when that truth threatens them. Arlo stopped and looked out at the harbor, where the rising sun was casting its first streaks of light across the water. I know, he said. I know he will strike back. I know some men will choose him over me. And I know the price may be very high. He turned around, and there was no hesitation left in his eyes. But for more than 20 years, that woman carried his shame as if it were her own, alone, in silence, under a name that was not hers. She had no power, no protection, nothing but a notebook and a music box. I do. If I have everything she did not have and still choose silence, then I am no different from him. He looked at Dora. Arrange a meeting with Frank Owen. First, I want the old man to confess about the paper before I place it on the table in front of Salazar. Dora picked up her phone, and Clara understood that the wheel had just begun to turn, and nothing would be able to stop it now. Frank Owen arrived first, just as Arlo had arranged. The old lawyer stepped into the glass room with his cane, and the gait of a man long accustomed to sitting behind powerful desks. But when his eyes touched the objects laid out on the dark wooden table, the journal, the bundle of letters, and most of all the false death certificate, he halted for half a step. Mr. Reyes, he said, trying to keep his voice calm, you called me here without saying what this was about. Sit down, Mr. Owen, Arlo said, and it was not an invitation. The old man sat, and Arlo pushed the death certificate toward him. Does this look familiar to you? Owen glanced down, and Clara, standing silently in the corner of the room, saw his hand tighten around the head of his cane. I'm not sure what you mean. Let me help you, Arlo replied, his voice still soft, but each word cut like a carved mark. This is the death certificate of a woman named Rosa Delgado. It was made many years ago to report that she had died. The problem is that she only passed away 3 weeks ago, in a nursing home, under that false name. After living more than 20 years beyond the day, you and Salazar believed she had been buried. The person who forged this document is the only one who can explain why a death was declared before it ever happened. Owen said nothing, and that silence stretched long enough to become a confession. At that moment, the door opened, and Hector Salazar walked in. At 71, he still carried the straight posture of a man who had never allowed anyone to see him bend, his silver hair combed neatly back, his sharp, cold eyes sweeping across the room and stopping on the things on the table, then on Arlo's face. He did not look surprised at all. So this day has finally come, he said, his voice frighteningly calm, the same voice Arlo had heard throughout his childhood. I wondered who had been digging up old matters. It turns out to be a little housekeeper girl and a torn notebook. His gaze passed over Clara with a brief flash of contempt, then returned to Arlo. That woman never did know how to stay silent properly. Do not speak of her, Arlo said, and for the first time in that room, there was something in his voice that made both Owen and Dora lift their heads slightly. You have no right to mention her. Salazar sat down in the chair across from him, unhurried, as though settling at his own dinner table. I picked you up from the ruins of a family about to fall apart, Mateo. Yes, I will call you by that name, because that is what you want to hear today, isn't it? I fed you, educated you, taught you how to survive, turned a weeping little boy who spent his days clutching a music box into the man this entire city fears. Who do you think gave you everything you have? Your lies did, Arlo answered. The truth, Salazar said, the corner of his mouth lifting slightly. You want the truth. Fine. Your father was a weak man who intended to drag the whole organization into the light because his conscience was bothering him. And conscience is a luxury men like us cannot afford. And your mother would have dragged you down with her, raised you in poverty and fear, until you grew old and died in some slum. I gave you a life. You should be on your knees thanking me instead of sitting there judging me with the journal of a dead woman." "You admit it," Arlo said slowly. "You admit you took my father, my mother, even my name." "I admit nothing," Salazar replied, his eyes hardening. "I am only telling you that I saved you. What you choose to make of that is your concern." But just then Frank Owen, who had been sitting motionless all this time, suddenly spoke, and his voice trembled with the exhaustion of a man too old to carry another burden. "I made that paper." Salazar snapped his head toward him, but Owen did not look at him. He looked at Arlo. "Salazar told me to prepare it. And the letters she sent you through all those years, I was the one who held them back and kept them from reaching you. I kept them all in a drawer, year after year, telling myself I was only following orders. I am old now, Mr. Reyes. I do not want to take these things to the grave. You want a confession, then here it is. I confess it all." Salazar looked at the old lawyer with the eyes of an animal whose most loyal creature had just betrayed him, then turned back to Arlo, and for the first time a small crack appeared in his calm. "What do you think you're going to do, Mateo? You think you can stand against me? Have you forgotten who taught you every move you know?" Arlo rose, and he looked down at the man who had decided the course of his whole life, with no fear left in his eyes. "You taught me every move," he said. "But you forgot to teach me one thing. You forgot to teach me how to lose. Because you never believed the day would come when you would face someone you could not buy, could not threaten, and who had nothing left to lose." And the instant he said those words, the door of the room burst open, and Clara heard the heavy footsteps of men pouring inside. 3 men poured into the room, faces Arlo recognized at once. Men who had followed Salazar from the days when the old man still held the entire organization in his hands. Men loyal to the old name rather than to the man standing at the top today. The one leading them was a large man named Marlowe, who had once been Salazar's right hand before Arlo took his place, and his eyes swept quickly around the room, reading the situation in an instant. "Mr. Salazar," he said, not bothering to look at Arlo. "You called, and we came." Clara backed against the wall, her heart pounding, and she saw Dora quietly shift half a step in front of her. Salazar rose from his chair, his composure returning to his face like a mask being placed back on. "You see," he said, his voice growing smooth again, "the boy I raised is planning to turn his back on all of us. He listens to a dead woman and a notebook, then decides to drag what belongs to this family into the light. You all know what that means for every person in this room. Once that door opens, none of us will be safe." Marlowe turned toward Arlo, and his voice dropped, full of threat. "Put everything down, Reyes. The notebook, the tape, all of it. Burn them. Let old matters stay buried in the grave. If you do that, no one has to remember tonight. But if you try opening your mouth to outsiders, you won't only drag Salazar down. You'll drag all of us with him, and we won't let that happen." Arlo looked at him, then at Salazar, and he understood clearly that this was the price Dora had warned him about. This was no longer just a matter between him and his foster father. This was an entire system tightening around him, a system he himself had once stood at the peak of, now turning against him because he had dared to touch its foundation. "So this is your way," Arlo said, his voice strangely calm. "For 26 years I ran everything, kept each of you alive, making money, sleeping peacefully. And now, just because I want to know the truth about my mother, you stand with the man who lied to all of us." "This is not about truth," Marlowe growled. "This is about survival. Put it down." When Arlo did not move, the man stepped forward and reached for the journal on the table. But Arlo was faster. He caught Marlowe's wrist, and for one brief moment, the room erupted into chaos. The 2 men struggled, tables and chairs scraping out of place. One of Marlowe's men lunging toward Arlo, and Bruno, who had still been standing guard outside the door, stormed in to intervene, his whole broad-shouldered body slamming into the man and knocking him back. There was the crash of falling objects, the sound of harsh breathing, the confused pounding of feet across the floor. Clara pressed herself into the corner. Both hands clutched to her chest, not daring to breathe too loudly. But the chaos lasted only a few seconds. When it settled, Arlo was still standing there, breathing hard, his suit jacket disordered, but the journal was still held firmly in his hand, and Bruno stood between him and the others, his shoulders tense like a wall. Marlowe stepped back, rubbing his wrist, anger in his eyes but also a trace of confusion, because he had not expected Bruno, the most loyal man of all, to choose Arlo's side. "You choose him, Bruno?" Marlowe asked, his voice hoarse. Bruno did not take his eyes off the 3 men. I follow Mr. Reyes, he said curtly. Not a ghost from 20 years ago. Arlo straightened, adjusted his collar, and when he spoke, his voice had regained its cold authority, only now there was something else inside it, an unshakable finality. Listen carefully, he said to Marlowe and the two men with him. I am not burning anything, and I am not asking any of you to follow me into this. Whoever wants to stand with him can walk out that door right now. But remember one thing. From this moment on, I am no longer the man protecting you, and the man you have just chosen to defend will betray every one of you the instant it benefits him, exactly as he betrayed my father. Those words hung in the room, and Clara saw the three men glance at one another, the certainty in their eyes beginning to crack. Salazar looked around, feeling for the first time the ground shift beneath his feet, and Clara understood that the decisive moment, the moment when Arlo had to choose what kind of man he would become, was very near. Arlo walked around the table, the journal still in his hand, and stopped in front of Salazar, the man who had now sat back down but could no longer hold on to the easy composure he had carried at first. The whole room held its breath, because everyone understood that in the world these people belonged to, a betrayal like the one Salazar had committed could only be answered with one price, and Marlowe and the others stood there, half waiting, half afraid, to see how Arlo would strike. Clara, pressed into the corner, held her breath too, because she had seen enough tonight to understand that the man before her had more than enough power and reason to do the worst thing. Arlo looked down at Salazar for a long while, and when he spoke, his voice was low, almost tired. You are waiting for something, he said. I can see it in your eyes. You are waiting for me to do the thing you would do if you were in my place. You taught me that this is when a man erases a threat, that weak men talk, while strong men act and leave silence behind. He set the journal on the table, directly in front of Salazar, and all my life I believed you. I became exactly what you wanted me to become. Salazar looked up, and for one instant, his eyes almost seemed triumphant, as though even in defeat he still believed the son he had shaped would finally prove his lessons right. But Arlo slowly shook his head. No, he said, I will not do what you expect. Because if I do, then you win. You would die, but you would win, because you would turn me into you one final time. And I will not give you that. He turned to Dora. Call the people I told you about, the entire file, the false death certificate, Owen's testimony, everything connected to my father's death. Hand it to the authorities with the power to investigate, not our people, outsiders. Let the law do what violence never can. Call the truth by its proper name in broad daylight. Salazar let out a dry laugh. You are more naive than I thought. You think you can hand me over to the law without dragging yourself down too. Have you forgotten what your entire life was built on? Everything you own, every dollar, has blood on it, Mateo. I know, Arlo replied, and the calm in his voice made the whole room fall still. I am not lying to myself that I am innocent. I have done things I will have to answer for. When I hand over these files, I know they will shine light on me too, on what I have done under the name you gave me. I accept that. I would rather face the consequences of my life as a human being than go on living as something you created. He looked around the room, at Marlowe, at the old loyalists, then back at Salazar. I am leaving all of this. The organization, the chair, the world you call family. From today on, it is no longer mine. Whoever wants to continue can continue, but not under my name, and not under my protection. He bent down, placed one hand on the journal, and spoke this time as if to himself and to the woman who had written it. You taught me that power was everything, that love was weakness, that a strong man needs no one. My mother taught me the opposite, not with words, because they stole even her voice from her. She taught me with a whole life of silence, by keeping a music box for more than 20 years, by loving a child she knew she would never hold again. She was weak in the way you meant it, but that weakness was stronger than everything you ever taught me. Clara stood in the corner, tears slipping silently down her face, because she understood that she was witnessing something rare, the moment a man who had been shaped to become cruel chose not to return that cruelty to the world, even though he had every right and every reason to do so. Salazar looked at him, and for the first time in his life, the man could find no words to answer, because he had prepared for every kind of revenge except this one. Except being stripped of power by the very mercy he had spent his life despising. Arlo straightened, turned his back on him, and walked toward Clara, leaving behind an entire empire he had just laid down with his own hands. A few days later, after the files had been handed over, and the machinery of investigation had begun moving slowly, as it always did. Arlo sat alone in the glass room and turned to the final page of the journal, the page he had not yet had the courage to read. The handwriting there was weaker than on all the pages before it, trembling, nearly illegible in places, written in the final days when Rosa's hand no longer obeyed her will. But the last line was clear, as though she had poured every bit of her remaining strength into keeping it from fading. She wrote in Spanish, the language of the lullabies from long ago. Si encuentras a alguien con un corazón limpio en un lugar oscuro, no dejes que ese lugar se lo trague. If you find someone with a clean heart in a dark place, do not let that place swallow it. Arlo read the line again and again, and he understood at once whom she meant. She had known, with the strange instinct of a mother, that the person who brought this journal to her son would be someone like that, a clean heart lost in a place not meant for it, and she had used the final line of her life to leave a warning, not only for herself but for Clara too. That afternoon, Arlo went to the small apartment in the South End. Clara opened the door, surprised to see him standing there with no Bruno. No luxury car parked in showy display, only him alone with the journal in his hand. Inside the apartment, cramped but warm, Samuel sat in his wheelchair beside the window, a thin teenage boy with bright eyes and a quick smile, closing a textbook when he saw the stranger. "This is my brother Samuel," Clara said, her voice a little guarded. Samuel looked Arlo up and down with the fearless curiosity of 16. "You're the man my sister has been going out to see all these nights, aren't you?" he said. "She hasn't told me anything, but I know something big is happening." Arlo sat in the chair Clara pulled out, and for the first time in days, his face softened inside a space where there was no calculation, no threat, only a sister and a brother holding each other up in this life. He set the journal on the table and told Clara about the final line, about how his mother, even as she was nearing death, had still been thinking of the girl who had sat beside her. "She asked something of me that she did not have time to say aloud while she was alive," Arlo said. "She wanted me to make sure the dark place I once lived in does not swallow you, Clara, and I intend to keep that promise." Clara immediately went rigid, and the pride he had seen in her from the very first night returned to her eyes. "If you mean money, I don't need your pity. I didn't bring that journal to get paid. I did it because I promised her, that is all." "I know," Arlo replied, not offended at all. "If you had done it for money, I would not be sitting here. This is not pity, Clara. This is correcting something wrong. You gave my mother what neither I nor the world gave her, someone willing to listen. And you are carrying a cost you were never meant to carry alone." Clara opened her mouth to argue again, but Samuel was the one who spoke first from his wheelchair by the window. "Clara," he said, his voice soft but carrying a weight that made her turn back. "You have held everything up for so many years. You work 2 shifts, you don't sleep, you skip meals so you can save money for my medicine, and you think I don't see it? Just this once, let something become easier. For you, and for me too." The boy's words left Clara silent, her eyes reddening, because it was something she had never allowed herself to hear, that she had the right to accept help without feeling as though she had failed. Arlo looked at the 2 siblings, then went on, his voice slow and steady. "I will not put money in your hand like charity. I am creating a fund, a real fund, properly managed, for people caring for sick family members and unable to bear the costs, people like you, and like my mother once was. The fund will cover Samuel's surgery, and it will help other children, other sisters, the ones no one sees." He paused, "and I want it to carry her name, the Rosa Maria Reyes Foundation." Clara heard that name. The true name Rosa had been stripped of for more than 20 years, and something inside her finally softened. She wiped her eyes, then gave a slight nod. "All right," she said. "I'll accept. But on one condition. It has to carry her name, exactly as you said, and never mine. I was only the messenger. She is the one who deserves to be remembered." The memorial service for Rosa was held on a clear early autumn morning, not in a grand church where names could be engraved on bronze plaques, but in a small, quiet chapel at the edge of the city, where sunlight filtered through simple stained glass windows and fell across the old tile floor. There were no banners, no hardened figures from the old world, not a single trace of the empire Arlo had laid down. There were only white chrysanthemums arranged around a small framed photograph of Rosa when she was young. And beside that photograph, the wooden music box carved with a bird, spreading its wings, rested in silence, as though it had finally returned to the place where it belonged. Clara sat in the front row with Samuel. Dora stood quietly behind them, and Inez, the nurse from Bayside, had come too, her eyes red with tears. When it was his turn to speak, Arlo stepped forward before his mother's photograph, and for a moment he only stood there, the man who had once made an entire part of the city hold its breath, now silent before the image of a small woman. Then he spoke, and for the first time, his voice had no armor left around it. He said that all his life he had carried a name that was not his own, a name given to him so the woman who had brought him into the world could be erased. He said his mother's name was Rosa Maria Reyes, that she had never abandoned her son, that she had loved him in silence for more than 20 years, with everything people had still allowed her to keep. And then he said something no one had ever heard him say before. He said, "My true name is Mateo. That is the name my mother gave me, and today I take it back in front of her." The whole chapel fell still, and Clara felt tears roll down her face, because she knew that name had traveled a road longer than 20 years before it was finally spoken aloud. A year passed after that morning, and life, as it always does, kept flowing forward, quietly healing what it could. Clara had now enrolled in nursing school through a scholarship from the Rosa Maria Reyes Foundation, and her first clinical training shifts took place at Bayside, where everything had begun. One afternoon, wearing her still new student nurse uniform, she walked down the familiar last corridor and stopped before a room where an elderly woman lay alone, with no flowers, no cards, no one coming to visit, her eyes turned toward the window with a look Clara had seen too many times. Clara stepped inside, and instead of simply cleaning and leaving, she took a small wooden music box from her pocket, the replica Arlo had given her, and wound it, letting the gentle tinkling melody rise softly in the quiet room. The old woman turned her head, her clouded eyes suddenly brightening, and a rare smile bloomed across her wrinkled face. At Clara's throat, the silver teardrop pendant remained a quiet companion, the sole keepsake from her mother that survived every hungry night and eviction. And now she touched it no longer out of fear, but as a reminder that love, however small it may seem, is never truly lost. That evening, her phone vibrated with a message from Arlo, who had now fully left the old world and spent his time running the foundation named for his mother, though ahead of him still lay a long road of facing the legal consequences of his own life, a burden he had chosen to bear without running from it. The message read, "Samuel says you forgot lunch again, and that if I don't remind you, you'll skip another meal." My mother would likely agree with him. Clara smiled and typed back, "I'll eat after I finish rounds," then put her phone away, her heart lighter in a way she had not known for many years. Because life, in the end, had become something else, not what it had been before that journal appeared, but something with hope in it. And that is what this story wants to leave behind, that some people leave money, some people leave an entire empire, but the strongest people are those who leave truth and courage for the living. Never judge a person's pain only by what you see on the outside, because behind every quiet face may be a whole lifetime of endurance we know nothing about. A buried truth remains the truth forever, and it will always find its way back to the right heart, no matter how many years it takes. And sometimes, just one small act of kindness, a glass of water, a song, one moment of choosing to stay and listen, can be enough to change the fate of many lives. If this story has touched your heart, please subscribe to our channel, press the like button, and share this video so we can listen together to more meaningful stories every day. How do you feel about Clara and Mateo's story? What part of it made you think the most? Please leave a comment and share the feelings from deep within your heart, because we always hope to hear what you wish to send into the world. May everyone watching this video always have good health, a joyful life, and peace every day. Goodbye, and we'll see you again in the next stories.